That is one reason about partial successes in Effect.all. Can an effect without an error get interrupted?
Hang on one second. How does one reason about partial success in an Effect.all?
Yeah.
Can an effect without an error get interrupted? Do you mean like, okay, let's just, the answer is yes, if I'm understanding correctly. So here's what I'm understanding. This effect, this effect always succeeds with a string, and it has never in the error channel, right? So it never fails. There's no error, quote unquote error, right? However, can we interrupt it? Hang on a sec. Yield effect dot sleep 3 seconds. Sleepy program. I'm awake. Oops, that was not the right one. This one. Yield effect dot fork. Sleepy program. I don't remember if this is gonna keep. Now we sleep outside the fork for 1 second, and then we yield effect const fiber. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure if this is what the question was referring to, but let's also just reintroduce const program and do effect. So in this sleepy program, we sleep for 3 seconds, then we wake up, we return a string, and this is an effect that theoretically never fails. It has never in the error channel, right? If we look at the type that's returned here. However, if we fork this into a fiber, and then we sleep for 1 second outside after like we fork, we can then interrupt the fiber no problem. Now, under the hood, this is modeled, like interruption is modeled as a failure, but it's in the I guess it's like it is technically like a separate. We have expected errors, unexpected errors, and interruptions theoretically as like failures, right? Tap cause effect log error. Hopefully, this is what the question was asking. Node scratchpad office hours. And when we interrupt the fiber, I don't think we get anything back. The interruption here, like if a program gets interrupted by internal interruption, I think is the term. I forget. Like if it actually
it yields the
going on
interrupt.
here.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah, it is a final state. Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know the LSP could detect that. That's cool. So let's do something different now. Let's not fork this into a fiber. So external interruption did not trigger the error. I think internal interruption does. I think. These don't make me a liar. Oh God. I have to do this here. I forget how we can actually like visualize what's going on here, but the idea here being that like this the question was like, where was the question?
Can an effect without an error
Yeah.
get
So
interrupted?
if this is what you're referring to, like, can we interrupt this? Yes, we can interrupt this. But I'm not exactly sure if that's what you mean by like an effect without an error.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and then the other piece of the question, partial success in an effect.all. I'm not exactly sure. Again, if I'm, by the way, thank you all, the folks who followed me today on Twitch. Let me see. Shamanic Arts, Plague FPS, Olexmir, Wolf 2001, Matu Stefani, Consciousness Dev, Rohan Kuhl, and Shiba. Thank you all very much for the follow. I appreciate your support. Mattia, I don't know if I'm like reasoning about this correctly.
Yeah, we got like a follow-up to that question saying, I'm trying to reason about how a finalizer could roll something back if it got
So
interrupted.
finalizers should not be interrupted. Finalizers should
Yeah.
not be interrupted. A finalizer should be a program that never fails, whether by like the only way a finalizer could fail is defect. Like if a defect crashes your program. And I can if we look at maybe in effect add finalizer, and then we go to the actual implementation here. Where are we? Scope, add finalizer, exit. Somewhere in here. I think they want to run a finalizer on interruption. I'm a little confused on what's being asked. If you want to run a finalizer on
Yeah.
interruption, like if your program
Maybe.
gets interrupted, the finalizers will run. Like if you have finalizers registered in your program, they will run on interruption, on errors, or on defects. Well, yes, on interruption they will run. I don't know if that's the question.
Yeah. Maybe if it's not clear, if it was not a question, maybe try to create a gist or a GitHub repo of what you are trying to accomplish and ask that on the office hours channel on our Discord. We will be more than happy to try to look into just give pseudocode of what you'd like to have, and we'll try to understand what's a better way to accomplish that in a effectful way.
I'm going effect.all with 2 effects, 1 error, the other did something, and needs to rip a finalizer. Do you bind the finalizer first? Again, without code, I don't even know how to interpret this, because if you have a scoped effect, if you have an effect that needs to execute finalization logic, it's just my failing effect and my scoped effect, right? Darker, you tell me if I'm on the right track here. My failing effect. Boom. My scoped effect. So my failing effect is an effect that will always fail with a string, right? My scoped effect, this is an effect that has finalizers that it needs to run. This is the finalizer. Acquire release allows us to express this in one statement. We have an effect that requires some finalization logic. And you see that because when you look at the signature, you see there's a scope here. Now, if we run this, we provide the scope. Then we effect.run promise. This should be scoped.
Yeah.
Apologies. That's okay. And just again, tell me if I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
So contain the single return statement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, LSP. Satisfying Mattia's LSP. Okay. So if we have this effect.all and we run this, we're going to see just the error. Okay. And the reason for this is if by default effect.all runs sequentially, right? So my failing effect would run first. We would never hit this statement. We would never run this. We would never attach the finalizer. That's the first behavior I wanted to like show is effect.all by default runs sequentially. So this right here is kind of no different than doing this, right?
One and then the other. Yeah.
Theoretically, that's the same. Now we can then make it concurrency of 2.
Yep.
Hello. And I think that this is going to sort of have undefined behavior because this is like.
I think that the first one being failing, being like an immediate failure, would always like fail first in theory, because still it's like immediately
We
failing.
can even make it
like
slightly.
Yeah, you need to delay it a little. Yeah.
We can make it less deterministic. Right. This should, in theory.
Yeah. And even, yeah.
Yeah.
And
so we get this log. Now we're running these concurrently. So my failing effect hits the sleep, so it suspends, and it allows my scoped effect to start before. This was not even like allowing the second effect to start. It was failing like immediately. There was no async op happening here, so there was no way to start the second fiber. Now we have an async op. Suspension happens. It allows this one to start. So we start acquiring, and we immediately register the finalizer. Like when this effect is run, the finalizer is attached. When we fail after a second, the finalizer's already been attached to this scope, right? And because of that, even when we fail, we still get safe release of those resources. This is helpful. I might be getting confused by the gen syntax, so I only add the finalizer explicitly. Well, again, it's the same semantics, right? So like if we like adding the finalizer here, still allows cleanup to happen. Like the finalizer's attached here, then we run this program, right? This is the next thing that runs. We start this, it suspends, sleeps for a second, then we start the next one, it attaches this finalizer. But the idea here is these finalizers from these two different effects both get attached to this scope, and when we fail, this scope gets closed and those finalizers get run.
The thing is that they are once you add them, they are guaranteed to be run, whatever the result of your application is. Going on to the effect, an interruption, a successful result, domain failure, whatever, they will be executed. That's it.
But this finalizer is running even if the scoped effect succeeds, right? From the initial question, maybe Darker is Better only wants to run the finalizer if the other one fails. Then you would need some sort of dependent logic. Like you would need to have like you can't conditionally run a finalizer necessarily. Like I mean you can, I guess. You would need like
you'd have some mutable state that keeps track of which is
like you would need to track failure somewhere and then have that in the closure here. But I think that's not. I don't. I'm not sure what the use case would be for that, but like if that's what you need to do, like that, you
Mm,
would need some mutable state that gets tracked and like resolved. The other thing you can do is if you need to run something uh, on failure, like if you need to run cleanup logic and you don't want to attach a finalizer, you could also use Effect.ensuring, which will
mm,
always run. It's the same thing. You can register like a finalizer with an effect, but this will always run when this effect completes. Yeah, Carne is understanding. You only want to run the finalizer here. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, just so I just so I understand. You only want to run the finalizer for this effect if this one fails. You do
mhm.
not want to run it on success. You do not want to run it on interrupt. Like you want if this one does effect have something akin to a transaction? Uh yeah, STM. We'll talk about STM next week.
Mm.
I think that this is one of those cases
But yeah,
where Mattia's right. Like a more featured example program that we can then like dig into. We've already like spent quite a bit of time on this, so I
mm,
don't want to like spend any more time, but I think
it,
um like a gist would be
it,
super helpful here.
mm, at least of what you're trying to accomplish, because it could be one of those questions where you are maybe too focused on the way you want to implement that, and maybe Effect provides you a better primitive to get
Right.
that out of the box. So probably having like few like what we are trying to do
Yeah, you're
will
not
help.
hogging the chat, Darker. That's not what I'm saying. It's more that like Mattia and I think are getting in the weeds about like what you're trying to achieve. Where
Mm,
I forget what is it called,
specific
the
way.
XY
Yeah.
problem. We have in our Discord
Yeah.
like a thing that I think it's like under the community guidelines or something. Basically, like because we're guilty of it too. We get too focused on like what you're trying to achieve. Whereas if you tell us about the problem instead, we can probably offer a different, more like semantic solution as opposed to getting too in the weeds on like the problem.
Specific.
Any
Yeah.
other questions? I want to show off Effect CLI.
So I. Oh yeah.
I'm
Sure.
very I was very
Go on.
excited about this.
I.
So I created this like
Yeah.
the XY problem is when Mirella. Hello. The XY problem is when you ask about your attempted
Oh,
solution rather than the
hello.
actual problem. Be open to considering different approaches if your initial idea isn't working. Darker, don't feel bad about uh like don't feel bad about asking this question. I think that it was a very good one. Anyway,
Mm,
moving on. Feel free, by the way, to ask in Discord, and you can ping me directly. I'll give you permission just this once, um, so that we can talk about it better. It's not
yep.
just you guys. That is the first question I ask someone when they need me for semantic stuff. Yeah, I know. It's we really try not to get like sucked into the problem, but or into the attempted solution. We try to focus more on the problem, but it's hard. Anyway, I want to talk about CLI
Mm,
because I'm excited about it. I think
yeah. I am hyped as well for it. I've been trying some of the new features and I really love them.
um wait, quick question. Solo PM non-programmer using all those for coding, want to leverage DDD tools to make illegal states
Yep.
possible. Where do I go for idiom guardrails? Start at the effect documentation and also take a look at Kit Langdon's effect.institute. And then for setting up projects with Effect, I would also look at Effect.solutions, also from Kit. Yeah, that's where I would start.